Oh, Kevin McCarthy. Quite frankly, I don't see him as a leader. Do you? The Republican from California has been, the word is, desperate to be Speaker for a long time. But is he desperate to make America great again? I don't know. Take a look at Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida. In my opinion, he has earned the trust of millions of Americans. His intelligence, his intellect, his passion, and he's totally unafraid in my book. And it looks like he's unafraid to challenge Kevin McCarthy, or at least say, you don't have my vote. Congressman Gaetz, welcome back to Newsmax. Good to see you. How you feeling tonight?
Feeling great. I can tell you Kevin McCarthy doesn't have 218 votes to be Speaker. He doesn't have 200 votes. He doesn't have 190 votes, and that's because it's more of the same. And in Congress, we need to turn the page. We need to get away from the corrupt system that puts the lobbyists and special interests in charge, and we need a fighting Republican majority. It's one I don't think Kevin McCarthy can lead, and that's why we're trying to find alternatives to a return to the status quo. I think the American people didn't vote for that in November.
Let's, the results of the election aside, you must have had concerns about Kevin McCarthy before Election Day. Can you go through them? What are the deficiencies?
Well, Kevin McCarthy thought that Donald Trump should resign after January 6th. And when the chips are down, you're either fight or flight. And after January 6th, Kevin McCarthy was all flight. I also saw in this last election cycle that McCarthy invested millions of dollars in Republican primaries against America First candidates in favor of establishment candidates. And in many cases, the America First candidates won their primaries, but because they were hobbled by Kevin McCarthy's millions, they weren't able to coalesce the Republican electorate to be successful in a lot of districts throughout the country. And I also remember when Dan Bishop, Republican from North Carolina, put forward the ouster of Liz Cheney initially when she betrayed President Trump, when she betrayed our voters and our party and our movement. And it was Kevin McCarthy who stood before the conference and said that he vouched for Liz Cheney, that he needed Liz Cheney in the leadership team. And when I just verbally criticized Liz Cheney, Kevin McCarthy was caught on tape saying that he thought I was endangering people, perhaps fomenting violence just with verbal criticism of policy positions. That's not somebody built for this moment. This is going to be a very slim majority, and we're going to have limited time to investigate deep and intense corruption from the Biden administration. And we don't need someone whose first instinct is to back Liz Cheney, attack America First Republicans on the campaign trail, and suggest that Donald Trump's path is one of resignation rather than resurgence.
So where do things stand right now? You say he doesn't have the votes. There is this kind of fake news expectation, and even folks in the conservative universe who think, well, you know, Kevin's got it locked up. It's a fait accompli. That's not true. So you're telling me, so where do things stand now? What's going to happen next?
Well, on Tuesday, there was an election in the House Republican Conference. Kevin got 188 votes. 36 people voted against him. And since then, none of the 36 says they've changed their mind. In fact, 4 members of the Republican conference have come forward to say that under virtually any circumstance, we would not vote for Kevin McCarthy on the floor. So now we are in a process of elimination paradigm. And just like me and my 5 America First friends might have a veto over who the Republican speaker would be, I have to acknowledge that even the more centrist, even the more moderate members of our caucus hold that same veto. So we must now find some Republican, some person on the planet Earth that doesn't have 5 people who want to vote against them in the Republican conference. And I'd rather do that now on the front end rather than install someone who doesn't have broad support throughout the conference, who hasn't earned the trust of our members, because we're ultimately going to have to govern with about a 4 or 5 seat majority. So let's start with someone who has broad credibility across the Republican conference, not someone who's burned bridges with the America First crowd, with conservatives, and certainly supporters of President Trump.
Hey, you said somebody on the planet Earth. Now, that means we can look outside the House of Representatives, which I believe is actually legal. There's a provision where you can take somebody who's not a congressman. I want to pick up on that when we come back. And also, some of the highlights in your congressional career, in my opinion, as well, that I want to point out. We'll be right back. Oh, what a tweet. Devastating. Matt Gaetz can tweet. McCarthy, McConnell, McDaniel, McFailure. Ouch. Ouch. That is a good tweet, Congressman Gaetz. I'd like to, as you're good at Twitter. And I want to ask you about Congressman Lee Zeldin. You know, he ran a great race here in New York State, almost beat a Democrat in an overwhelmingly Democratic state. He's not going back to Congress as a congressman. The great Miranda Devine in the New York Post said he should be considered for the Speaker of the House. Tell us how this is technically possible, and is it possible that Lee Zeldin could be the next Speaker?
There is no requirement that the Speaker of the House be a member of the House. And maybe in these times, having someone divorced from the interplay of the floor of the House of Representatives, someone who could rise above it and lead our institution, would be very advantageous. I look at Lee Zeldin, I read Miranda Devine's piece, and it was quite persuasive. Without the sweeps of New York congressional swing races, we would not even have a majority. There are two places in the country where Republicans vastly overperformed, Florida and New York. And I think the Zeldin campaign was focused and disciplined, and it created an updraft for all of our candidates. I don't think there's anyone in Congress who has a negative view of Lee Zeldin, but, you know, we've got other former members that might be interesting wildcard candidates as well. People like Tulsi Gabbard. Hey, we may even have to dust Newt off. He's tanned, rested, and ready as far as I'm concerned. But Lee Zeldin, someone I think highly of, someone I know is widely respected across the conference. He's not campaigning for the job, but certainly the piece in the New York Post has a lot of folks thinking.
All right. And I think that this is totally impossible. It wouldn't happen, but conceivably it could happen. Donald Trump elected as Speaker. I mean, it's theoretically possible. They were talking about this a year and a half ago. It had some momentum in a weird way, but that's not going to happen.
I talked to the former president about it, and I did not feel the rod tip bend at all as I pitched this prospect. And look, there are probably 5 Republican votes against Donald Trump for Speaker, and so we have to recognize the paradigm we're in. We are going to have a leader who has broad consensus across the Republican conference. It won't be Kevin McCarthy. I wish it could be Donald Trump. It probably won't be, but we're going to have that type of message discipline and also a focus on these investigations to be able to really move the ball. I mean, Biden's still going to be in the White House. You're going to have Chuck Schumer running the Senate. So the way to get wins for the American people necessitates a focus on the investigations into the corrupt practices of the Biden administration and then connecting those corrupt decisions to the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump, at the grocery store, at the kitchen table when reconciling bills each and every month. We have to also be tough on the spending fights to come, and I don't think Kevin will do it. Maybe a guy like Lee Zeldin would.
All right. And by the way, we need you in those investigations. Nobody cross-examines like you or just the way you conduct these things. But I do have to ask, are you interested in being Speaker?
No, I am not running for Speaker. You know, I understand that maybe I rub a few people the wrong way. I don't have a lot of friends in Congress, so it would probably need to be someone a lot more effective at building consensus with everyone than I am. But I want to be on the front line of the fight. I want to be the person reviewing the documents, taking the depositions, holding the witnesses to account, making the criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, holding the Department of Justice accountable for their own violations of procedure and law. And certainly in the Armed Services Committee, I'm very focused on getting this wokeness out of our military. What they have done to our military, and I know you care a lot about this, it has really devastated my constituents who love our country, who are patriotic Americans, and we are going to find every bit of this wokeness, and we are going to unroot it from its very center in the soil.
And this, sir, is where you've impressed me a lot over the years, but when this happened, you took on General Milley. And not a lot of members would do that. He was talking about woke this, and, you know, he wants to know about white rage. And you interrupted him, and you really started going after him in a way that, and you were just baffled. You were you were amazed at this character who's wearing a general's uniform. And anyway, the thing that I really liked about it was, you're a civilian and you're not afraid of taking on a 4-star general. You know that the agencies, they use that against members of Congress, the men and women of the State Department, the men and women of the Pentagon. And I think a lot of folks in government, in elected government, forget that those agencies are here for us. We're not there for them. They serve the people. And I think you're pretty good. I think you know that, and it's exemplified in how you question these guys.
Well, I appreciate you saying so. I represent a lot of the great war fighters and patriots who make this country great, and I often try to channel what just regular Americans would want to know if they had these folks in front of us. But for the last 2 years, I've only had 5 minutes to ask these questions. Now that we're going to have subpoena power, I'm going to have hour after hour to delve into the decisions around Afghanistan, how we've fallen behind China with hypersonics, how we have not been able to correctly assess the will to fight with almost anyone in the world. And I am proud now to stand with Marjorie Taylor Greene and others to demand accountability over all of this cash and military equipment that we've sent to Ukraine, oftentimes in violation of our own procedures regarding end-to-end chain of custody of that equipment. So we've got a lot to get into. We have to be ready to start at the beginning of January. I do not believe that Kevin McCarthy is the leader to have the right vision and focus for those investigations, but my goodness, that work is critically important to the safety, security of our country, and just to our ability to be a successful, prosperous nation where all of our people can be the best version of themselves.
Can I run this by you? Your thoughts on January 6th? I mean, there's so much about January 6th that was not highlighted by the January 6th committee. The security failures, the Capitol Police securing the Capitol with bike racks, Capitol Police just letting people in, and of course the death of Ashley Babbitt. Is this something that I know you're concerned about? Do you have any thoughts about how to shed light on it and get some answers?
Well, Kevin McCarthy has said he would disband the January 6th Select Committee. I would repurpose it. I would take their snarky little Twitter account and I would pump out 14,000 hours of video so the American people could see what really happened. Because we had a lot of folks who had no intention of violating the law that day, but the criminal acuity was increased because of the actions of people who worked for the federal government. We've already seen reporting showing that the FBI had informants in some of these paramilitary groups that they've criticized. And I want to know, was that day more violent, more criminal, more deadly as a consequence of any of the assets or agents or informants that were under the auspices of the federal government? And if we just disband the committee, if we just pretend that this never happened, then you know what? It will probably happen again. This archetype scenario that we saw in the Whitmer, phony kidnapping debacle, and then on January 6th, where you actually have the feds doing all they can to try to booby trap people into a dynamic where there's criminal consequence for what would otherwise be a misunderstanding or something that certainly wouldn't rise to some sort of charge. So I wouldn't disband that select committee. I would repurpose it, and I would get to these folks who have been used as pawns, as political pawns. People got locked up, got put in solitary confinement, not because they were a particular danger to the country or going to overthrow the government, but because Joe Biden wanted to scare the American people that anyone that was MAGA or America First was a threat. And you know what? We're not a threat. We are patriotic, God-fearing Americans, and we will not allow these violations of people's civil rights to go unanswered.
We're so glad you're there. Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, to be continued, sir, and good luck. Many thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, we'll be right back.